Hello and welcome to the channel. Today we are going to take a close look at the Flair 58. Flair is one of the most talked about manual espresso makers over the last years. They started out with the Flair Classic, then they made the Flair Signature, eventually the Flair Pro and Pro 2. Then they also released the Flair Neo, which was more of a basic espresso maker. I've tried most of them except the Neo, and today I have the Flair 58 in front of me, which is the most advanced of all of them. All of the Flair espresso makers can make really good espresso if you know what you're doing, but there are still some limitations in the workflow and the volume that they can produce. So for that reason, many people have been requesting a bigger version, a more professional kind of workflow, and that's what we have today, or at least that's what Flair proposes for us. There are some new and pretty groundbreaking innovations in the Flair 58. For instance, as the name indicates, you have a 58mm portafilter, which is a standard portafilter that you can just log in here, and you can use the portafilter of most 58mm espresso machines. Of course, there are going to be some where the lugs don't really fit, for example the Gadget Classic Pro, but in most E61 machines they're going to have exactly the same diameter as this one here, and you can just use them interchangeably. Of course, this also means that you'll be able to use all the accessories. So for instance, if you have a special tamper or a distribution tool, then you'll be able to use it with the Flair 58, which is great news. Also, another big addition to the Flair is that you have an electronically heated group head. So before you had to use a lot of energy preheating the group head, but that's taken care of now, but we'll talk more about that later. But let's first take a close look at the design. The first thing you'll notice when you take the Flair 58 out of the package is that everything just seems a little bit nicer and bigger compared to the previous versions. So this attention to detail carries over into the body itself, which feels a lot more sturdy and like it's built to last. The group head, of course, and the lever is just very long, and you have this nice T-grip, and it's just a very nice experience to pull down and feel the leverage. The Flair 58 also comes with a portafilter. It does feel pretty nice, and I've been very happy using it. It has this nice wooden handle here that matches the handle on the lever. The 58 also comes with a funny little tamper. It's a little bit unusual, but I think it's actually pretty cool once you've gotten used to it. It has a lot shorter handle, and it's meant to make you focus a bit more on the angle of the puck. So you just use your fingertips to kind of put it into place, and then you can make sure that you get an even puck. Overall, I'm pretty happy with everything that's included and the quality of the materials. Now, the Flair 58 has been out for a while, and there are already a lot of reviews out on the internet. I think the big difference between this review and the other ones out there is that my unit here has the valve plunger installed. So the valve plunger can be bought as an add-on if you already have the Flair 58, but I think all the new ones that they're gonna ship from now on will have this built in. So this is a slightly different system. That means that you can just put water in here, and then you lift the lever, and then you're ready to brew. Instead of having to pull up the plunger first, take it out, then remove the pressure gauge and the plunger, put in the water, reinsert the pressure gauge, and then press. So overall, this is a little workflow improvement that will save you for a little bit of hassle every time you're brewing. So as I mentioned, when I first got the Flair, it actually had the original plunger, and I have to say, after I've been using this for a few weeks, it's really a huge improvement of the workflow. So if you are looking to get yourself a 58, definitely make sure that it's the one with valve plunger. The first couple of times it does feel a little bit weird to pour the water here while you're pulling up the lever. It feels like the water could splash out and ruin your shot. But they have this interesting design where there's a little gap that is only open when you pull the lever upwards, and then when you press down, you have a tight seal. At first it can also be a little bit tricky to know whether you completely filled the chamber, but after a while you'll start to get the hang of it. In general, I will say with manual espresso, it can be a little bit fiddly, there can be many parts. So every time the workflow is made easier, I'm just a happy man. Now, the second big upgrade compared to all previous Flairs is that you have electrical preheating. So with the old Flairs, it was kind of a tedious process, especially with the Flair Pro 2, which required a lot of preheating. So that meant either you had to boil the group head on top of your kettle, or you had to add boiling water to it a few times to get it up to temperature, and you don't have this issue anymore. So the way this works is that you have this cable and power supply that's connected to the group head, and then you just plug it in, press to adjust how hot you want it, and then you just wait, and it's actually heating up quite fast. I don't know why, but for some reason I had the impression it might take 5 to 10 minutes, but in reality it's more like 3 to 4 minutes. So it's about the same time that it takes you to boil some water, grind and distribute and prepare the puck. So in the end, it's pretty good workflow. You have 3 different temperature settings, but I usually just go for the hottest one. Unless you're brewing like really dark roasts, I think it's by far the best solution. Just use the hot one and then adjust the temperature on the kettle instead. In daily use, this preheating works really well, and it ensures that you don't get these sour and astringent shots that you would sometimes get with the Flair Pro 2 if you hadn't done the preheating step properly. However, this electronic preheating also creates a new problem, because besides this little temperature controlled box you have here, you also have a long cable and a big power supply. If you have a dedicated coffee station, this isn't that big of a problem, because then you'll probably be able to hide the power supply behind the table. But if you're planning on using your Flair at the kitchen counter, then it becomes a little bit messy, because usually you'll have the plug right in front of you and then it will dangle into your cooking area. There won't be any like really good place to hide the cable and the power supply, which is pretty bulky. If you're more like a purist and you want to go 100% manual, Flair actually recently launched a different version that doesn't have the electric heater. It's actually a little bit cheaper, but I'm not sure I would recommend that model, because that means you have to remove this brew head and heat it up manually every single time. And from what I know from the Flair Pro 2, this is a slightly annoying extra step, and I can only imagine that it will be a little bit more difficult with this brew head here. On the same note, this lever is pretty long, which is great for the leverage, but it also means that it extends up pretty high when you have it on the kitchen counter, and it probably won't fit under many cabinets. So for instance, it didn't fit in my kitchen, so every time I want to brew I have to pull the espresso maker out a little bit, so I have enough clearance to extend the lever all the way up. I think you probably need around 25 inches / 65 centimeters to be able to comfortably use this device. So it's a good idea to do a little bit of planning if you want to use the Flair in your kitchen. I've already talked a little bit about the workflow, and I think there are both pros and cons. As with all manual espresso machines, the workflow is a little bit weird at first, and then after a few weeks you kind of like gotten used to all the slightly unusual steps, and then muscle memory kicks in, and then it's actually pretty easy to use. However, there are a few things that are completely unusual compared to other espresso makers. For instance, if you have this version here with the valve plunger, you have to use a puck screen every time you brew the espresso. Personally, I've actually gotten used to using a puck screen, so I don't think it's a big deal. I also use it if I'm making espresso on my electric pump machine, because it just makes cleaning up so much easier. But just be aware that you'll actually have to use it every single time you want to use this espresso maker here. Another slightly unusual workflow is that you will also have to manage the brew water after you're done brewing. So after you pulled the lever down and you finished your shot, if you pull the lever up again, you will stop the water from dripping, but as soon as you release it, water will start flowing again. So you'll need to switch in a cup rapidly here, and it's a little bit of a cramped area if you also have a bulky scale, so it can feel a little bit hectic at times. Of course, we also have to talk about the taste of the shots, because obviously we're reviewing an espresso maker. And I'm happy to say that you can get really good shots with the Flair 58. I will also say that this is not a beginner machine, so you need to have a good grinder, you need good coffee, you need to know what you're doing, and you need a little bit of practice to get the best out of it. I found that the shots have a lot of clarity, and if you want to get that extra texture, then you really need to ramp it up to 9 bars very quickly, and that will give you a little bit more of intensity in the cup. However, if you want a more smooth, modern espresso, where you can taste all the flavor notes, that's very easy to pull with a more extended, slower lever style shot. So to wrap all this up, I think there are a lot of great things to say about the Flair 58. If you compare it to the Flair Pro 2, I think the company has been able to address every single point of criticism and improve upon it. However, in doing so, they've actually created a couple of new problems. I can't help thinking how this espresso maker would be if you had a bit more of a simple electronic heating system, maybe just one setting that you would be able to plug in directly. You didn't have this big bulky power supply. After all, I think the target audience for this espresso maker probably already have a temperature controlled kettle. Or if they don't have one, they're probably pretty comfortable eyeballing the temperature. I mean, you have a rolling boil, that's one temperature. Then you have the first few bubbles, and then you have somewhere in between. So I'm not really sure about the need for 3 temperature settings. And what if it was a 54mm basket instead? Maybe you could have a shorter lever and you'd still get the advantage of having an ecosystem with a lot of distribution tools, pucks, baskets and so on. So all this also raises the question, which is kind of, who is this espresso maker actually for? I don't think it's for the beginner, because there are just so many moving parts and things that you need to be able to control in order to get the best out of this espresso maker. I think if you're just starting out, then you already have a lot of things on your mind. So using a lever is probably only adds to the confusion. The Flair 58 is in the same price range as the Gacha Classic Pro and the BREW Bambino, and I think I would probably recommend most beginners to go for one of those machines instead. Then with the previous Flair models, they were so affordable that you could say it was a cheap entry into a real espresso. However, you can't really say that about the Flair 58. So I think when you combine all these aspects, the Flair 58 is only really aimed at the coffee geeks who are already into espresso and would like to experiment more with a lever machine. So if you're a collector, it definitely has a place in your collection. Or if you already spent some time with an electric machine and you're considering getting a lever like La Pavoni or the Robot, then I think there's a good argument to go for the Flair 58 instead. Maybe you could even consider it if you have a small coffee stand or a cafe. So my opinion of the Flair 58 is that it's a great espresso machine, a really cool gadget, but I'm not really sure it's the ultimate manual espresso maker that it attempts to be. Also, when you have a machine that's a lot less portable and that much bigger, I think you're taking away a lot of the benefits of manual espresso makers in the first place. It still has some of the benefits of manual espresso makers. For instance, you don't have a boiler and a lot of small pipes, so you can use whatever water you want in here and don't have to worry about descaling and longevity. So it's likely that it will be able to last many years, and you'll just have to change an O-ring here and there after a few years. But of course, this is just my opinion about the Flair 58. I would also be curious to hear what you think. Do you already have a Flair, and are you considering upgrading to the 58? Have you already tried this one? Let me know down in the comment section below. That's it for today. I will see you in another coffee video very soon.